Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Jeff Pegues, along with CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate, and there are new reports that the Russians are behind a hack of the White House computer network. Federal agencies are investigating. This can happen to the White House, too.
Absolutely. And this is not a new incident. Keep in mind, Jeff, this happened several months ago, and it's been part of a series of cyber intrusions of U.S. government systems, not just the White House, but the State Department, the Pentagon. Keep in mind, this is the unclassified system. There are classified systems that are more heavily protected, harder to infiltrate.
But that doesn't make it any less of an issue for the White House.
Not at all, and it's problematic for two reasons, Jeff. One, for the reasons we're discussing, which is you can't have internet and cyber infrastructure that's vulnerable to penetration by the Russians or anybody else. That's just not good. You have sensitive information, even if it's not classified on there, and you shouldn't have penetration. So that's the first order of battle. The second, though, and this is more intriguing from a geopolitical perspective, is to the extent that the Russians are responsible for this, that attribution has been drawn back to the Russian government itself, having sponsored this attack. This is telling because it's not new that the Russians have been behind attacks, but it is a symbolic intrusion at a time of heightened tension between the West and Russia. And it could be that the Russians, like they've done with other cyber intrusions, are trying not just to infiltrate and to learn what they can, but also sending a message that they can play this game of hybrid warfare that includes cyber attacks.
And when this happened last October, there was this discussion over what was happening in Ukraine, correct?
Absolutely. And there's been a question and certainly recognition that the Russians have been behind significant cyber intrusions around the world. They're one of the most significant actors, along with the Chinese, in cyberspace. And of course, they've been behind the attacks on JP Morgan, the major bank breach that happened last summer. And we've known from the Director of National Intelligence now for a couple of years that the Russians are behind significant attacks. So that's not surprising, but what is interesting is they've added this to their portfolio of weaponry, as they've done with Estonia and Georgia in the past, but they've added that to this portfolio in the context of hybrid warfare and this competition with the West.
So when something like this happens, how does the U.S. government respond?
Well, I think there are layers to the response. One is what you described. You try to do everything possible to understand who's behind it, what kind of infiltration happened, what kind of data was exfiltrated. So there's the cyber forensics around it to also give fidelity around who was responsible. So that's part of it. Second is you've got to harden your systems, because to the extent that there are vulnerabilities in one part of the system, there are likely other vulnerabilities. And you don't want the Chinese, the Russians, or anybody else getting inside your systems, whether unclassified or classified.
So what about the U.S.? Does the U.S. have that type of toolkit?
The U.S. is great. I mean, with the best in the business. That said, there are constraints on what the U.S. does. The U.S. Doesn't, by policy and by law, engage in the kind of cyber economic espionage that the Chinese do. They don't coordinate with non-state proxies and organized crime groups and hacktivists like the Russians do. And we certainly aren't trying to disrupt or destroy systems, because we depend on them heavily, the cyber systems, the financial system, critical infrastructure. And so there's no question the U.S. has capabilities, and we're the best in the business in many ways. But we actually constrain the way that we use the power. The challenge is the Russians and the Chinese are thinking more aggressively about how they use it.
So we do it too, but it's how the U.S. government does it that's different.
I think that's right, and it's how it plays out in the changing landscape geopolitically, which is really fascinating.
All right, for Juan Zarate, I'm Jeff Pegues, and that is Flashpoints.